Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an episode of RideAlong. I am your host, Bilal Khan, and I am here with Tupac, Ammar Alshukry, a.k.a. Ammar Alshukry.
Wow.
Yes.
That was clever.
Very clever.
Trending topics are?
Today, trending topics, Ammar's distant cousin, Tupac Shakur, died.
September 13th, 96.
1996, yep. The same year I learned about who Tupac Shakur was. And everybody in my middle school class was like, where have you been living?
He was in New Jersey, so.
Yeah. But I was in an all-black school, and so that was my first year in that. Actually, my second year. My second year, and then that's where it was just like...
That's when he changed his name to Belal to fit in. What's your real name?
It was also the same year that people told me to go back to the Buddha.
I don't know what that means.
No, because whenever we study history class, right, they realize, okay, this kid isn't Hindu, right?
But you're not Hindu?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, they knew that because I would participate with them making fun of Hindu kids.
Oh, horrible, man. Kids are so mean in middle school.
I know, right? And but then when it came to history class and they talk about Siddhartha and the finding of enlightenment and Buddha, and somehow it would escape from me that, okay, this kid's from India, he's not Indian, so he's not Hindu, so he must be Buddhist. And the truth is, they weren't that far off, because the town I was born in is right next to it.
Next to what?
Bodh Gaya, which is where Siddhartha found enlightenment, aka the Buddha.
I see.
So that's why when they said they go back...
You know, it's funny, I don't think of the Buddha as Indian.
You don't? Like,
no.
He's as Indian gets. Founded this philosophy, which now became a religion, and Bodh Gaya is now the center of pilgrimage for Buddhists. For the longest time, the Hindus actually drove them out. They wiped them out, and they went to China and Tibet and all these places.
I see.
And later, when there was peace again, they allowed them back in. The funny thing is that, well, it's not funny, but it's these guys, they took over the land that was Buddhist land.
Yeah.
And so by law, the Indian government legislated that they need to allow the Buddhists to worship there and whatnot. So the agreement was the Hindus own the land, like Hindu owners, and they lease it to the Buddhists. So they don't even own the land.
Yeah.
Which is tragic on their part. It's kind of the same story as the guy who founded, or not founded, but the guy who came up with Superman. He sold the rights to it. You have the founder of Batman who retained all his rights.
But that just makes sense because Batman is a winner. So it makes sense. Superman has been taking L's his entire existence, and the guy who made Superman should take an L for making Superman. Stupid Superman. But we salute and we thank the creator of Batman. If you're stupid enough to think that the disguise you give your superhero is just that he puts on glasses and he takes them off,
except
you deserve what you get, bro.
Except this guy will take his kufi off and nobody will recognize him.
Yeah, man. You're like, where's Ammar?
In regards to Tupac, what's the story behind him?
Mother, Afina Shakur, part of the Black Panthers.
But he was actually part of the Black Panthers?
His mother was.
Oh, his mother, okay.
He was born in like 1972 or 3 or something like that.
Okay.
Born in New York, moved to Baltimore, then moved to California, Oakland, probably around the time that in Baltimore he was part of, he went to a school for the arts.
Oh, he went to college?
No, a high school or
okay.
a middle school for the arts. So one of those like specialty schools. Obviously very talented in theater and in art.
I wonder if that's where he gets his stage presence from.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of these, whether, you know, the gangster persona that he did was almost something that was like created. It's almost something that he actually just...
He developed and personified.
Yes.
Okay.
But if you look at like his early footage, he was like a different type of kid.
The question is he really formerly a gangster?
I think he entered into that world and I think he was comfortable in it. But he's definitely a product of his environment. You know, that's the environment that he found himself in, and maybe his survival instinct just forced him to embody that. And yeah. The things that made him stand out, of course, was his intelligence, his passion for sure. His voice was very powerful.
Was he his own lyricist?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Of course. He definitely didn't have ghostwriters. He used to write 3 songs a day when he was after he had come out of prison.
Okay.
So and you hear his voice, you recognize his voice just from the content.
I mean, he's got a unique rhythm too.
Yeah. So he the story goes he went to Oakland, got involved with a rap group there in Oakland just as like a roadie, someone who travels with them, and then he ended up going solo, did his first 2 albums. Second album was number 1 while he was in prison, and the rest is history. How long was he in prison for? I don't remember. I think it was like 8-9 months. I don't think it was more than a year.
Okay.
Before he made bail, and that's when he joined Death Row Records. He joined Death Row Records with Suge Knight and some even more shady characters, and he came out and he just kind of set the world on fire again.
And now, when it comes to the whole Tupac Biggie beef, what's that all about? Was that more so just to sell more records, or was there actual anything there?
Sometimes they would say that.
Okay.
So sometimes he held that, like, this is just,
Like, my perception has always been it's kind of like the kind of beef that they have in the WWE.
To some degree, I think they definitely were cognizant of that this sells records, and I think that record labels recognize that this sells records.
I mean, conflict and controversy is always fun.
Of course, yeah, it's always fun and always.
I mean, politics. Look at what the political campaigning of Donald Trump. Not even just Donald Trump, but like even in the primaries, like Hillary Bernie versus Donald and his other candidates, and even now Donald versus Hillary. Yeah. It's come to a point where it's like you don't even like any of them.
Yeah. Yeah. But Tupac could be as like ignorant as anybody else as far as the tracks that he creates.
Yeah.
I mean, people will talk about his like multiple personalities or him being. I think they, he mentions that he's a Gemini, so he has like split personality or what have you. Whatever, we don't believe in any of that, but.
I mean, there's split personality disorder.
Forget, not just that. You just have different emotions. Like one day or one morning, you might feel like introspective, and then in the afternoon you've forgotten about all of that and you're with like some friends who are just ridiculous, so you become idiotic with them, and that's just part of being an artist. That's just being part of being a human being. Yeah. Right? But artists actually record all of those emotions.
Okay.
Right? For people to experience from them. But I think when he was in his introspective, or when he was in his socially conscious, or when he was reflecting on society, I think he was of the best to do it. Just whether it's verses or whether it's just lines that he's had incredibly powerful moments. That digs from his tradition of being someone who's always been politically conscious. He was his mother was part of the Black Panthers, so he took from that tradition. He used to read a lot as a kid, as well as just being somebody who is actually, concerned, about the community that he was in. Even if he would turn 180 degrees, he wasn't consistent. One day he's talking about saving the black community, the next day he's talking about shooting up some dudes,
Okay. I would assume it would be understandable to express hatred towards people within your community because maybe they're going against the fact that maybe they're harming the community? Or was his expression...
No, he wasn't like somebody who's like a consistent good guy. Okay. You know what I mean? Like you have people who are just consistent. Your Will Smith. He's just consistent good guy.
Okay.
But then you have people who play the role of the good guy and the bad guy. So they're the hero and the anti-hero.
That's like Hulk Hogan or Hollywood Hogan. Then back to Hulk Hogan.
Not really. No? Because he doesn't switch back and forth. More like your Steve Austin.
Okay.
You know what I mean? He'll do good guy actions, and then the same night he'll do like really messed up stuff. Whereas Hogan, if he switches to bad guy mode, he was bad guy for like 2 years. And then he switches back to good guy for like 2 years. And he changes his entire outfit. As opposed to just having within you the qualities of both being a good person and a bad person.
So that's what makes him a complex character.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. That's what makes you complex.
And I guess the culture of protest and expression that, even exists even today. We have Colin Kaepernick, his whole thing of taking a knee, and he's protesting the whole situation with the situation of America and Black America, and him silently protesting that. I guess the question that comes up is, was Tupac protesting, or was he just being an artist?
He was protesting everything. Like he was protesting American empire. He was protesting the way that the black community was being treated, not just being treated, the systematic oppression against them.
Yeah.
So he says, instead of war on poverty, they do a war on drugs so the police can bother me. Right? And that's true. Like, instead of declaring a war on poverty, they created a war on drugs that criminalized drug dealers and recreational drugs and all of these things, so that unleashed them on the black community, criminalizing the black community and black youth, and putting them in a position where such a high percentage of them would be going to jail, to the point where they saw it as being some sort of ritual, that you have to do a bid when you grow up. Like, that's like part of being a rites of passage. It's a rites of passage. A general population of people. It might be similar more to I don't know, maybe like apartheid South Africa, or...
It's a badge of honor.
Yeah, it's a badge of honor. It's like getting into college.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So, or he says, it's funny, when it rains and pours, they got money for war but can't feed the poor. How many trillions of dollars have been spent on this Iraq war right now?
The war of terror in general.
Yeah, right? And so all of this money comes from nowhere, or it comes from somewhere, but when it comes to just homelessness or
college debt,
college debt, or all of these things, there's no budget for it. He has a lot of social commentary that was just very, very, very insightful.
I guess the question that comes into mind is, how often has protesting ever shaped the course of history in America?
Look at the civil rights struggle.
Okay, we had the civil rights struggle, but was it through protesting that that finally the issue of segregation was lifted in Supreme Court? Or was it through legal battle?
I mean, it's all together, right? It's not one thing over the other. It's protesting, it's economic boycotts, it's legal struggle, but you have to bring attention to the issue. If you don't bring attention to the issue, then none of that is going to actually happen.
Because I'm thinking about even apartheid South Africa. What is it that finally got them to lift the apartheid laws? It was international sanctions, right? Because I think that was part of the issue, where they finally hit the country on a government scale, where it hit them in the pockets. So I guess the question that comes up is, protesting that's not tied to economic impact, does that have any effort?
It does. It does, for sure. When you hit people's pockets, that's the hardest thing you could possibly hit. But in absence of that, you do what you can.
The question that comes up is, what are we bringing awareness to?
Who's we?
Not we, but like in terms of as the American community, to...
If we're talking about Colin, he actually described exactly what he's trying to bring awareness to. He simply said that there is injustice in this country that still hasn't been, addressed. There's police brutality that still is rampant and hasn't been corrected, or other injustices that he saw, that he felt he wanted to bring attention to, and that's what he's doing. So he's doing it according to his capacity.
So why the outrage against him taking a knee?
That's the question. That's the $1 million question. Why the outrage? Why are people so offended by it? When it came to Black Lives Matter, people were saying, well, that's not the way that you protest. Don't protest by walking and blocking highways. That's not the right way to protest. Don't protest by, cursing the police. That's not the way to protest. Well, what is the right way to protest then? Because Colin is not insulting anybody. He's not cursing anybody. He's not blocking anybody's way. The guy's simply sitting down, when the national anthem is being played. So,
But the thing is, everybody's sitting down when the anthem is being
no,
played.
everybody's standing up and
Well,
putting their hand on
90%
their
of people who are watching the televisions.
on TV. Yeah, that's another issue. But
It's like
that's
he's talking
true.
about respect, right?
That's true. But the question to be asked to those people is, who have such outrage, what type of protest would you like? Right?
Yeah.
Because the definition of protest is it is supposed to bring somebody awareness, and protests are going to be uncomfortable. That's the whole point. Otherwise, if I'm just sitting in my house, sitting down while the national anthem is being played and nobody sees me, and I'm protesting, that's my protest, it's not very effective.
Nope. So I guess the question that comes up is there anything Islamically that comes into
By the way,
play?
you always say that. You said that like 8 times today.
What did I say?
Right now, someone who's watching the video is very annoyed.
What did I say?
Well, I guess the question that comes up, that's literally the phrase that you use every single time.
True. There's been a number of
Right?
phrases.
I got you, to that person who's upset. Like, why do you keep saying that?
My question that starts swirling in my mind next.
I guess, or you could just say the question.
Is there a history of protest Islamically? And is there a right way or a wrong way?
Islamically.
I mean, I'm looking at the history of like during Spanish history and what was happening in the in Persia at the time, right? Persia, Syria, Iraq, and the Hijaz, right? You had the family of the Prophet. We're talking about the grandsons and the great grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib. At the time, they're protesting the injustice of the Umayyads, but every time they get killed, they're crucified.
Yeah. So then you have the issue of protests. One of the earliest ones documented is the Prophet ﷺ walking into the Kaaba, and at one head of his and the Muslims were divided into 2 ranks. In the first, the head of the first one is Umar ibn Khattab, and at the head of the second one is Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. And this is shortly after the Islam of Umar, because now the Muslims have like 2 knights, right? 2 champions. You have Hamza and Umar at the head of both, and they walk directly into the Kaaba, and it's kind of like, we're here, right? We're this minority, and we will be respected, and we will worship freely, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it.
The thought that comes to mind is, wasn't the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at the time just as noble and respected?
He himself was.
Yeah.
Okay. He was protected by his uncle. But Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was catching hell. And everybody else who didn't have that, they were getting,
So Umar and Hamza, they could just go out and be like, these folks are under our protection, don't you mess with us.
well, they just went with them. And
Okay.
yeah, that was what was understood, right? By that they're organized and they have strength and power, and strength in numbers.
So essentially organizational and political and economic protection to be able to express and do what you believe.
I don't know about the whole economic and all of that, but they're just making a statement initially. Then you have, with regards to whether it protests their Islamic significance or what have you, they fall under the category of commanding the good and forbidding the evil. Because when you're protesting,
Yeah.
that's what you're supposed to do. And it's known that it becomes an issue of something where you weigh the benefits and the harms. Scholars have spoken for it, and scholars have spoken against it, and those who speak for it will usually say that protests end up having a lot of munkar in and of itself.
Okay.
It'll have a lot of evil, and they'll just point at any particular protest that you go to in any particular city, and they'll say, look at
Like what kind of one could
look at what aren't we talking about? You go to any protest and you'll literally find a lot of free mixing. You'll find a lot of people missing their prayers. You'll find a lot of people just partying it up, you know what I mean, as a form of protest. So they'll look at it like that.
That's not all of them.
Have you ever been to a protest without any of these things?
I mean, without like, you talk about partying it up, and it's like, I'm
Yeah.
imagining a club scene.
No, but it doesn't have to be a club scene. It doesn't have to be like that, but it's still,
Like I know there have been protests that are like basically a public rave.
exactly.
But that's not like,
I mean, they got the DJ. He's keeping the crowd live.
yeah, essentially.
Okay, so that's not gonna fly according to Islamic standards of etiquette. But then those who say it's okay, they'll say, well, you weigh the good and the bad, and not only that, they don't necessarily have to have these things.
Yeah.
And why must we submit that these things have to be a part of it? If you have the right organizers, you try as best as you can.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of goodness that comes out of it, of course, of showing people your position on a particular issue and showing whoever it is that you're directing the protest to,
so that they can hear it.
so that they can hear it. They can hear your commanding of the good or your forbidding of the evil that you're trying to rectify.
I guess the question that comes up is,
I guess the question that
yes.
comes up is,
I'm
just gonna catch him every single time.
Oh man, I just forgot my question.
It's gone.
It's gone. Let's bring it down to a local level. How do you hold people accountable? Okay, you're protesting, but what are you doing about it? Because it's one thing to protest, right? It's another thing to actually take steps to rectify it yourself.
To rectify yourself?
Talk about political change, right? A lot of these things have to do with policy. Are we doing what needs to be done, ensuring on a local level all the right people elected? Are the right laws being looked at?
Yeah, then you're talking about a lot of things. You're talking about politics. You're talking
talk about system.
You're talking about economics. You're talking about system. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to affect systems and affect change, then what are you doing on a real tactical level other than shouting and making noise?
And that's something that's really, really, really important that people have to pay a lot of attention to and that we have to organize. There's a reason why Bani Israel is the ummah that's mentioned the most in the Quran, and that's not just that we can point our finger and say, oh, Bani Israel, what a horrible group of people. It's because we're going to resemble them a lot. And, part of the characteristics that they have that was, very apparent. No, it's just not gathering on any particular goal. Always scattered. What type of cow? What color cow? What, you know what I mean? A million questions, back and forth, lots of debate, never submitting, to a greater good. And that's, Allah says, تَحْسَبُهُمْ جَمِيعًا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. He says, you consider them to be the same, but their hearts are all scattered. Every single one of everybody.
The community as a whole is being pulled in a million different directions.
Or they're pulling themselves.
Okay.
And I remember once going to a Salat al-Jum'ah, and there was one of the masajid that have security outside. And so the security was non-Muslim, and there were two guys talking to each other. And when I was walking in there, the one guy was saying to the guy, he's like, hey, man, you ever see the way they pray? Yo, man, they pray feet to feet, shoulder to shoulder. That's unity. And I was like, Allahu Akbar. That's the way we're designed. That's the way we're supposed to be. Everyone is fighting tooth and nail to actualize what they view to be the most ideal scenario, where we have to recognize that sometimes in gathering over that which is less than ideal, there's more benefit for us than to scatter and to separate, seeking that which is ideal. And a lesson that we learn from that, a beautiful example of that, is in Uhud. Islam teaches, one, the importance of having leadership, and two, the importance of submitting to leadership.
Regardless of whether you agree with them or not.
Of course.
You've agreed that they are your leaders, so you're going to go with it.
That's right. The Prophet said, don't let three people gather and take a journey, except after they've appointed one to be the Amir. Right? So that's teaching us, one, is to be cognizant of this issue of, if we're going to take this journey, we're going to do this project, whatever, there should be someone who's in charge, someone who will be the decider when we differ, and someone who will be the arbitrator, and someone who will be the facilitator, and someone who will be responsible. And that also teaches everybody else to submit to some degree, recognizing that that's how communities go forward.
So whether it's protesting an issue or expressing ourselves, we need to understand that there's got to be central leadership that's agreed upon.
Yep.
And however much it irks us what their decisions are, we got to go follow through.
All right, guys. جزاكم الله خير. We're here. صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم كثيرا. والسلام عليكم.